It's Tech Talk Part 2, and welcome back. It's 20 minutes to 9 p.m. and it's time now to discuss. Tonight we're talking about how easy it is to get hacked in South Africa. And we've spoken about cybersecurity before. We've had chats regarding this type of thing. But there are certain things that you need to do to obviously stop getting yourself hacked in 2021. And to talk to us a bit more, we welcome Jan Vermuelan to the program tonight. Good evening, Jan. Welcome once again to the program.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Hi, Jan. Good evening.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome stuff, man. Great to have you with us. Great chatting with you as always. We've discussed this topic in terms of cybersecurity and hacking a bit. We had a brief discussion on it. In terms of how easy it is to get hacked in South Africa, I know there was an article on MyBroadband some time back that was written out, right? But let's say an attacker in South Africa gains access to your online social media or your profile, whatever the case may be, for a small amount of data, right? Is this basically because of identity verification as such, or are there different policies across the industries that allow you to reset your passwords, etc., and how easy it is to gain this?
Yeah, so you've touched on an important issue here, and that's that a hacker might not even be targeting you specifically.
Okay.
And I even hesitate to use the word hacker. These hackers is a term that I like to reserve for technical people that build things. So sometimes those things are used for good and sometimes they're used for evil. But these are cyber criminals, right? Because they don't necessarily do anything that requires great technical skill to get into your accounts, right? They might just send a spam email out to trick people to give up their usernames and passwords, or perhaps there is a legitimate hack on a one organization. Let's say like the Liberty hack that happened a while ago.
I think we touched on that when it happened. Yes,
right. And so out of that, a group might gain some information about a bunch of customers. They might not even have usernames and passwords, but they get a little bit of information. Then using that information, they can get more and more information about potential targets until eventually they've got enough to try and trick a whole bunch of people out of their usernames and passwords. And then what unfortunately happens is, if you've got a data breach or a hack on a company and usernames and passwords are involved, a lot of people reuse the same passwords across multiple platforms. And if these criminals can link, for example, your ID number to a password, all of a sudden they've got a password that they can try across a whole host of services. So they use your ID number to cross-reference with a whole bunch of other data breaches. They find your usernames there, and then they try your password everywhere they can and see where they get in. And if maybe they get lucky. Yeah. And so a very simple way to avoid this happening to you is to not use the same password.
Okay. Now, you mentioned obviously the usernames and passwords, etc., in terms of obviously and how easy it is and what they might send out as maybe a spam mail, for example. We touched on that recently. I think it was the Liberty or Standard Bank or one of the banks had their database or their client details were breached, if I'm not mistaken, sometime recently. There was a leak. Now, let's say a leak occurs through a database backup called, maybe the SQLs, or maybe it's loaded onto a web server. I want to talk about then what happens with private data. I mean, we're talking about maybe a coworker who's provided permission for a demonstration. Maybe, we're talking medical aid, your personal info, bank details, things like that. With a small amount of leaked personal data, will an attacker or cyber hacker or criminal be empowered enough to gain access to all of my private information?
If they want to go after a specific individual, then yeah. And here's the anatomy of an attack like that, right? So we had the privilege of having a hacker and cybersecurity professional, Dominic White, at one of our conferences. He works for SensePost, which is now Orange Cyber Defense, and he actually demonstrated how, armed with permission, obviously he's not a criminal, he's the good kind of hacker, and so he, with the permission of one of his co-workers, took a little bit of medical information. I think he was able to get into their medical aid, their co-worker, his co-worker's medical aid thing, right? He was able to get in there, and then like he would or he got like a little bit of medical information, right? Now, armed with that information, he calls up his co-worker's medical aid and basically convinces the operator on the other end of that call that he is his co-worker. So basically a form of identity theft, right? It's not identity theft, but it's masquerading, pretending to be someone else. Then you're friendly and you're like, hey man, we've got this problem and I'm desperately trying to get into this account. Please man, can you help me reset my password? And so they start asking security questions, and he's able to guess or has the answers to those security questions because of the little bit of medical data that he was able to learn about his co-worker.
Looked professional, sounded the part, etc.
Exactly, sounded the part over the phone. Exactly. Suddenly, he has access to his co-worker's whole medical history through this medical aid, and he can see his co-worker's dependents, ID numbers, email addresses, the whole shebang. And so from there, what hackers call this is moving laterally through the system. So from there, it's not like they're going to try and go deeper and deeper into your medical records. From there, they branch out. They look at that email address and go, maybe I can hack into that. Let me try to do a password reset there. Let me try to do a password reset there. Let me see. I've got credentials for this person from that data leak over there. So let me try that to hack into here or there. And then, so they use all of this information to get a foothold, to get in somewhere. And then once they're into your email, that's disaster, because email is used as a measure, often as a measure of last resort for password resets and stuff. Right. So if you don't have two-factor authentication enabled on,
and I was about to highlight
on your accounts, then email is how you do password resets and stuff. And so that's just sort of one example that Dominic gave us about how, if it were a targeted attack, this is how a hacker might do it. But I mean, obviously, different people will have different risk profiles, right? Now, if you are President Cyril Ramaphosa, somebody might want to hack your iCloud account, right? Because they don't know what kind of state secrets they might get in there. But if it's you or me, we're not really a prime target for an actual hacker.
Now we're talking NSA level kind of hacking. I mean, this is a different.
It doesn't even have to be. It doesn't have to be even that sophisticated, or a nation state that's after you. It can be a financial criminal who, with some technical skills, who might come after you because you're rich. Right. So, or, they might catch wind of the fact that you're busy with a major transaction. Your company is busy with a major transaction and try to steal some of that money or all of that money. Right. And so that immediately raises your risk profile. So ordinary people don't have much to fear from attacks like this.
These are targeted attacks, right? Basically, they wouldn't just randomly go and hack anybody.
Exactly. So what we do have to fear are more sort of scattershot approaches that cyber criminals take. like like the spam emails, the phishing emails we were speaking about a bit earlier, where they'll put up websites that look like ABSA or Standard Bank or Nedbank or Time Bank, Capitec, whatever, and you'll get phishing emails from that come from banks that aren't even your bank, right? So because they're hoping to guess right. So there aren't that many banks in South Africa. So, they'll guess and guess and guess and guess until they get it right. And then what they try to do is trick people into clicking on the links in that email through various tactics. So they'll try to scare you by saying, if you don't act immediately, your bank account will be suspended. Or you will be prosecuted under the full might of the law if you don't sort this out now.
Below, for example, kind of thing.
Or they'll be like, hey, you've just received 20,000 Rand. Click here to get your money. So they'll do whatever it takes to try and get you to click. And then they'll have a form there that as you type in your bank account number, your PIN, your password, and they'll try to trick you into just giving them your login credentials.
I remember, I want to just come in here. There was this SMS scam going around. I don't know if Sadek fell for it, but anyway, you've won the British 50 million euro or whatever lottery. Click
lottery
here
or whatever.
Yeah. So things like that. It can come in the form of an SMS, an email.
Yes.
But what happens to, or even on WhatsApp?
Yeah.
But what happens to encryption and multi-factor authentication then? Wouldn't this play a part, or how does this work then?
Encryption is essential for blocking targeted attacks, right? So a hacker that might come after you specifically and listen in on your network connection for your pins and passwords, right? And so it's been that's why it's been standard for connections between your web browser and your bank to be encrypted for years now, the better part of a decade now, right? And across the whole internet, everything is encrypted now. HTTPS everywhere, right? What was the campaign slogan? So that's less of a concern now. There are the fiddly technical attacks that can still happen, that try to subvert that try to sort of disable encryption and stuff. But generally, the technical community have got really good at preventing that from happening. So encryption is less of an issue now because everything is encrypted now, almost. Multi-factor authentication, you see banks requiring that. And certainly for higher risk individuals. So if you're someone with a relatively public persona, you can turn on two-factor authentication on your Twitter account or on your Google, your Gmail account or something like that. And I would highly encourage people to do that if they are in a higher risk category. What multi-factor authentication basically means is that in addition to your username and password, you now also need a separate PIN or code of some sort to log into an account. And that's usually in the form of it used to be the OTPs that you would get via SMS from your bank.
PIN,
but that's changed now. Most banks, because of SIM swap scams, and so banks have stopped using SMS for this and have started using their own apps to generate these
fingerprint ID, etc. Nowadays, we've moved on.
Exactly. And so multi-factor authentication is basically PIN, password, plus something else. It can be a fingerprint, as you said, or it can be a one-time PIN. And banks in South Africa require multi-factor authentication now. So that's also less of a concern because you can't do online banking if you don't have OTP enabled or if you don't have multi-factor authentication enabled. But certainly, while we're talking about this, what I'd like to encourage folks is to strongly consider, if you're in a higher risk category, to enable multi-factor, just two-factor authentication on your Google account, Twitter account, Facebook account, etc.
As civil society and South African individuals themselves, how susceptible are we as a society to these type of attacks, etc.? And there was this bill that was going to be passed, the recent cybercrime bill or something. We touched on it some time ago.
Yes.
Does this collate into all of this? And are we actually safer, or does the government have a better hand in terms of people also wonder, okay, what does the government have on me? They are also afraid about that. What happens in these type of scenarios now?
Yes, so we're extremely susceptible to cybercrime in South Africa, unfortunately, and it's basically due to lack of enforcement.
Okay.
So, and that answers your other question as well. So, there's so many steps that we can technically take. So there's still an extreme lack of education. So people are reusing passwords everywhere. And that is a huge problem. On top of that, people are using bad passwords, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or QWERTY, or people think they're clever and they go 1QAZ 2WSX3EDC. They just go down the rows on the keyboard. You're not fooling anybody. Like, hackers try all of those combinations. So, and even if you go exclamation mark,
it's their job. It's their job to do that.
So a strong password needs to be an actual strong password, not just a password that fools the little thingy, the strong password meter on the thing you're signing up for. So South Africans are using extremely weak passwords. We're reusing passwords all over the show. It's a problem that makes us susceptible to attack. The other thing that's a huge problem is total lack of enforcement and lack of competency in South Africa when it comes to cybercrime. Yeah, it's wonderful that we've got the cybercrimes bill in place now, but there's no competency at the SA Police to deal with these crimes. I sat down with a police officer. I think I've told you the story before. I sat down with a police officer at the Hartbeespoort area. Who's in one of the. He's a detective, and so he's an elite police officer in a small area, right? So he's sort of who people come to report crimes, and the amount of online scams being reported to this person. He says, please, he looked at me, he said, please, man, can't you help me? I'm completely out of my depth with regards to these online scams. Aren't there systems or anything that can help me find these criminals that are, so it's OLX scams, people, setting up fake profiles to sell everything from puppies to expensive hardware, right? And then they trick you into paying a deposit, and then off they go with your money, right? And so these are difficult scams to guard against for online classifieds platforms like OLX.
It is. I mean, I want to just come in there for a sec. I mean, let's say you are seeing something that's a bargain. You're like, hey, give me a small deposit. I'm going to secure for the securitization of X product, whatever the case is. Next thing, man's gone, disappeared, account gone, whatever. Things like this happen.
And that happens. And these guys are smart. They'll set up like social media presences for themselves, everything. So you see their name, and then they call you on WhatsApp, right? And so you think you're speaking to a legitimate, sincere human being on the other end, and you go look them up, and they've got a Facebook profile, they've got a LinkedIn profile. So like they put effort into these scams. And then, a week later, you still haven't received your thing, and all of a sudden all those accounts are gone. So they make their money out of these scams, and then they just roll over to the next one. Next profile, next scam. And so
money in the bank, basically. That's what is happening.
Yeah, and our police, it's wonderful that we've got the cybercrimes bill, to try and make it simpler to prosecute these crimes. But the police can't find the criminals. So if our police don't have the capacity to actually locate and arrest the criminals, then that's the line of defense offered by the cybercrimes bill is worth nothing. And so
I want to just come in here, Jan, for a moment. In terms of rank, in terms of susceptibility on a global scale, where would you see South Africa placed?
There's over 200 sovereign states in the world.
Would you think we are one of the very easy countries to penetrate and, basically our normal civil society? Or do we have, the mechanisms in place? Do people have the mindset about this? Or are we just giving away too much information too easy?
Yeah, I mean, I think South Africa would be the lowest ranked amongst mature economies. So if you
Yeah.
look at, if you look at the UK, the United States, Canada, the Australia, New Zealand, the rest of Europe, perhaps even Russia, Japan, China, we would rank badly compared to them, but we might be better than, say, Brazil or Venezuela.
Okay. Now, you mentioned earlier, obviously, the importance of not repeating a password on various platforms. So, basically, getting a password manager, perhaps, would this maybe work, or like LastPass or KeyPass, things like that? Would these type of things work, or Google Authenticate kind of thing? What
Yes.
are our alternatives that we should look
Yeah,
for?
and so that's what I recommend. Trying to, people know that trying to remember all your different passwords is impossible, and
Yeah.
so you remember 5 or 6, or perhaps let's say maximum 5, and one of them is your password for one password or KeyPass or Bitwarden or LastPass. I know LastPass has made headlines recently because they've changed the way their scheme works, and so they are moving to a more commercial model, encouraging people to pay, and so people are looking for alternatives. But these services, these password managers, are worth paying for if you want something that's cross-platform. If you're in the Apple ecosystem, then you can just use Apple's password manager, not a problem. But the second you want to move outside the Apple ecosystem, things get tricky. But yeah, absolutely, use a password manager. Password managers, if they do get breached, like LastPass was hacked at one stage, all the passwords that are stored in there are encrypted. And so, it's incredibly unlikely that even after being hacked, that an attacker would eventually gain access to your passwords. And then they also make it incredibly easy to just change all your passwords again. So there's a couple of techniques that you can use. One of them is a password manager. The other one is like a secret algorithm that you use to generate passwords, right? Complex passwords. So you might have like a base phrase, like a complex phrase that includes letters, symbols, and numbers, right? And then so you've got sort of like, and that might be your base password, and then you've got an algorithm in your head for for slapping on like a second part of that password, depending on whichever service you signing into, right? So whether it's Google or Facebook or Twitter, so you've got the same base password, and then Google or Facebook, you might modify that and attach like a second part of that. But it's easy for you to figure out what that second part is, but it's difficult for a hacker to guess how that might work. So you can figure out little systems like that for yourself. I know a lot of folks in the information security space operate that way. But certainly a password manager is the first thing I recommend to folks, especially like if you are into cryptocurrencies, or you want a complex bank password, but you can't remember it, then store it in a password manager. And then just when you need it, you go and look it up, and you type, you either copy and paste it in, or you type it in. And that solves that problem of remembering all these different passwords all over the show.
Wow, we've touched on a number of talking points here. Jan, in conclusion, you mentioned obviously a password manager is a solution. What about wiping your digital footprint in terms of maybe the online accounts you don't use, or your like privacy first kind of alternative, something like that, or even a VPN to boost your browsing perhaps? Would that maybe provide more anonymity?
So a VPN doesn't really add anything with regards to your security in this regard. VPNs are useful if you are on open Wi-Fi networks and that sort of thing. And even then, with the web being so encrypted nowadays, the usefulness of VPNs are getting less and less. But certainly, it's an extra layer of privacy and encryption, and so if people want to feel extra safe, it's certainly an option. It's just um, it's not nearly as much of an essential purchase as it used to be anymore. Then with regards to wiping your digital footprint, that's a good idea. If you can remember any of that stuff, go back to your old MySpace account or whatever. And if you're not going to delete it, at least change the password to something more secure. Back in 2003, having a password, QWERTY68 or whatever might have been fine, but nowadays that doesn't fly anymore.
Maybe it's somebody's username, perhaps. You never know. Things like that. Jan, we thank you so much for your time tonight, man. We really appreciate it. It's been great chatting with you, and that's where we leave it tonight. Have an awesome weekend, my man.
You too. Have a great long weekend, and it's been a pleasure to be here.
And be safe. Take care, man. Ciao.
Bye.
And that's a wrap. Yeah, that was Jan Vermuelan. So we were talking about how easy it is to get hacked in South Africa. What are some of the alternatives you should be looking at? One would be a password manager, multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication. And that brings us to just after 9 p.m. Wow, the time has gone by so fast. And that's a wrap of Friday Night Live with me, ST. And inshallah, I'll be back in another 2 weeks' time. Dhakir will be here next week, inshallah. Have yourself an awesome long weekend. Stay safe wherever you are. If you are traveling, please be careful and enjoy. Take care. Assalamu alaikum.